next time. Getting close. Ah, perfect.
Greeting, my fellow PC gaming brothers and sisters. I am, of course, Brother Lotz, and today we're going to read from the Holy Book of Gaben. Now, if everyone will, turn to page 1998, and we shall see what the Holy Gaben has to say about first-person shooters. And the Holy Gaben says, ensure that the first-person shooter is complex, with well-rounded gameplay, and an engrossing story. Oh yes, ladies and gentlemen, today we are taking a look at one of the most legendary first-person shooters of all time, Half-Life. But before we get to the game, let us first take a look at its developmental history.
The story of Half-Life begins in 1996 when Valve was founded by Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington. Both of them were originally Microsoft employees that struck out on their own. They wanted their first game to be a horror 3D action game, and as was the style of the era, they licensed an id Software product, the Quake Engine.
Ah, those were the days, back when id was at the top of their game and people went to them for the tools to create the next big thing.
They simply used the id Tech 1 engine as a base and ended up modifying 70% of the engine's code. As you would expect from this era as well, Doom was a major influence on the developers, and designer Harry Teasley stated that Valve wanted to scare you like Doom did.
Now one must remember, at the time of its release, Doom was scary. Its graphics and sound were second to none. No one had ever seen a game look that good. So in all reality, people could be scared by that, especially if you're playing that alone and late at night. My grandfather was playing that particular game alone and late at night and about jumped out of his chair when the phone rang.
In development, they found themselves having trouble with the level design. And so, as the story goes, they created a level with all the weapons and enemies and scripts that they had created so far, and thus, due to this, they were inspired to continue. The working title for the game was Quiver, and it was called this because someone was a fan of Stephen King, and named it after the Arrowhead military base seen in the Stephen King novel The Mist. Half-Life would eventually be chosen as it was evocative of the game's theme and had a visual symbol to go along with it, the Lambda, which represents decay constant in the Half-Life equation. Like with Star Wars before it, a game this ambitious was considered a risk by most publishers, and thus Valve had a hard time finding a publisher to actually publish the game. And eventually they found Sierra Online, and they were able to sign a one-game deal with them. The game would initially be shown at the Electronics Entertainment Expo in 1997, where it received massive acclaim. In that same year, science fiction writer Mark Ladaw was brought in to work on the characters and level design, and Kelly Bailey was brought in to work on the soundtrack. It was hoped that Half-Life would be released in 1997 to compete with Quake 2, but Valve felt that the game needed to be revised, and thus most of the game was reworked considerably up to its eventual release in 1998. This would of course be the start of the concept of Valve Time, where their various games would be constantly delayed. The game would finally be released in November of 1998, and they were still working on it just a few days prior to its release. When the game was released, it was popular, it was amazing, and people absolutely loved it. And by 2008, it was able to sell 9.3 million copies.
The very first version of Half-Life that I played was Half-Life on the PlayStation 2. This was more updated than the initial PC release, with slightly better graphics. But I didn't really enjoy it all that much and didn't get very far. Then a few years later, I would finally try it on the PC, and then I didn't get very far on that one either. It wouldn't be until this year that I would actually complete Half-Life, Half-Life Blue Shift, and Half-Life Opposing Force. And I only was able to complete those games because I played them co-op with Spin Co-op. Spin Co-op actually is a very legendary Half-Life co-op mod that has been in development for many, many years. and it is an absolutely excellent co-op mod to say the least, and that is the actual version of Half-Life that we're going to be taking a look at in this particular review. And since it's pretty much just Half-Life 1 with a few minor elements to it, it's still representative of the game as a whole. So with that, let's finally jump into Half-Life and see just what it's like.
The gameplay for Half-Life is that of many genres. It's a first-person shooter with great AI, great guns, and cool and varied enemies. It's a puzzle game, and it is of course a first-person platformer, as many games from this era like to have platforming elements, as the platformer genre was fairly popular. The first-person shooting is amazingly awesome. The guns all feel good and sound good, and there are usually large amounts of ammo to be found. The guns will vary from port to port, but in Sven here, they feel quite good and work great. The Crowbar is a fun weapon all around, and it's rather fun to do, as the meme says, and break all the things, including faces. The enemies have a nice variety to them as well, and range from the annoying little headcrab to the rather well-programmed soldiers. The game, in terms of shooting, can get really bloody hard too, as these soldiers are quite adept at finding the one free man and filling him with lead.
I am 100% with the great Duke Nukem when he says, "I hate Valve puzzles." And I don't care what the Book of Gaben says.
The Valve puzzles, ladies and gentlemen, are well thought out, well designed, and really add to the overall experience. But I absolutely hate them with a considerable passion of at least a million suns. To a point at least. When I tried and failed multiple times to play this game single player, I would get stuck on one and then say, screw this, I'm going to go and play something that's less obtuse. I personally feel that these puzzles can indeed go on over long and can bring the game to a screeching halt. If you play this game co-op, however, then the puzzles can get really fun, because then you have other people to brainstorm with and to figure out just what needs to be done to progress in the game. And in this particular instance, I can see why people love Valve puzzles.
Let us, of course, turn once again to the great Book of Gaben. One must be fleet of foot, and one must use the most holy of jumps, the crouch jump. With this jump, one can overcome any obstacle.
The platforming is by far the weakest aspect of the game. Gordo runs like he's the bloody Doom guy, and is extremely floaty to boot. The crouch jump for me is also somewhat finicky, and in Half-Life, mastering it is a must. For those who don't even know what a crouch jump is, it's where you hit the crouch button and then the jump button to pull off a special kind of jump. Now you can just jump regularly, but it's not going to get you that many places. Getting the timing down right for these crouch jumps is also not an easy prospect. For example, I need to jump over this gap. I can make it once or twice, but then there are times when it takes up to 5 bloody minutes to get that bloody timing right. The floatiness of the controls and the slipperiness of the game really makes precision rather difficult, and you can find yourself sliding off things to your death all the bloody time. This isn't that big of a deal, and I never got too pissed off sliding off a ledge to my death, but it really is one of the weaker aspects of this game. The graphics for Half-Life, like with Doom, have been updated and changed numerous times since 1998, and Sven Co-op uses the HD textures and changes some of the graphics here and there, but it is still representative of the original game. And this game would have looked amazing in 1998. The texture work and 3D models may have aged, but the level design is still second to none in many respects, and to this day feels as good or better than modern games. The levels have bits of destructibility to them as well, such as collapsing ceilings and things of that nature, and really for 1998, the game would have been a technical masterpiece and still holds up today.
And one must remember, I am a very late convert to the Gospel of Gaben. At no time was I asking, can there be better graphics? In fact, I was really asking a much more damning question. Why aren't modern games as good as this game that's almost 20 bloody years old?
The sounds for the game are decent enough. The people are voice acted, but they use the same 2 or 3 voice actors, and their performances are very video gamey. However, there are some decently acted lines here and there, and the overall sound design, while it has aged, still holds its own. Music-wise, the game sounds amazing. Sure, it's not heavy metal, rather it's heavy mental!
Protective system for use in hazardous environment conditions. High impact reactive armor activated. Atmospheric contaminant sensors activated. Vital sign monitoring activated.
And now, let's take a look at the amazing story.
The story of Half-Life begins on the tram. This is where Valve shows off all the hard work, and in 1998, it would have been amazing. And when I finally learned some patience, I found it to be rather impressive as well. One aspect of Half-Life that is absolutely kick-ass is the fact that they love to foreshadow different things, and have numerous little details that one might miss on the first playthroughs. Like that security guard, who would have known that he was the guy in Half-Life Blue Shift? The game takes place entirely from Gordo's perspective, and the game seldom takes control away from you, and the game also has, to my knowledge at least, no cutscenes whatsoever.
Once again, from the Gospel of Gaben. Thou must keep thine player in control at all times. Thine must have free will to control, to see, to understand, to truly grasp the great work.
The story is in many respects an update of the one from Doom. A science experiment goes awry, and some portals are torn open, and aliens invade, and you, Gordon Freeman, the beardy one, must escape the Black Mesa facility. But as you would expect, it's anything but easy, and the plot is extremely deep. But unlike with other games, you the player can avoid most of it and just shoot everything in sight and progress from level to level without any real engagement. But like any fine story, the more you pay attention to what is going on, the more you will learn about the events going down at Black Mesa. One really cool character is the G-Man. He will show up from time to time in the game, and unlike other games, he is very mysterious and very creepy. Really, there are times where he is just a fleeting image at the corner of your eye, and the game never really tells you anything about him.
There are numerous fan theories about just who or what the G-Man actually is. My personal theory is that he is some future form of Gordon Freeman himself, mainly because, well, G-Man, and a few other elements that I do not wish to spoil.
The story is one of the strongest aspects of the game, as there are many awesome details to be found throughout, and it requires that you, the player, use your brain to figure out just what is going on and who the players actually are.
And so that is Half-Life. I am really glad that Roadkill inspired me to play this bloody game all the way through. Really, this is not only a great single-player game, if you have the patience, which I don't, it's also a great co-op game that is really, really enjoyable all the way through. It has great first-person shooting gameplay. It has, to be perfectly honest, really funny first-person platforming. It has decently enjoyable puzzles if you have good amounts of patience, which I'm getting more and more of all the time. Ultimately, Half-Life is indeed a great work, on par with the likes of Doom, and I mean Doom 1993. Valve Software did an amazing job on this game, and I highly recommend either A, checking out the single-player experience, or B, if you have limited patience like me, checking out Sven Co-op. It's free on Steam if you play it with the particular Sven version. And so, I am GeneralLotz, wishing you good Half-Life 2, and good Half-Life 3 when it's done, or whatever makes you happy.
If you enjoyed my review of the absolutely excellent Half-Life, please consider subscribing, and if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can continue to bring you these great video game reviews.